Hello and welcome to 360 Self Love. I am your host, Vimalis, and today we are going to be talking about feminine embodiment and how rigid discipline disguised as high achievement can steal your life. I am so excited to introduce you to today's guest, Sarah Shepard. Hi, Sarah. How are you?
Hi, Vilma Liz. I'm so delighted to be here with you.
I'm so happy that you're here. And I would love for you to introduce yourself, share anything you want to share about you, what you do, just anything you think our listeners should know.
I'll do my best to keep it somewhat brief. I have quite a long story of what brought me into teaching. I teach mystical anatomy, basically. I coach women and I teach mystical anatomy. And I came from a really unique childhood that always gave me the opportunity to question the way humans are and the way that they act. And I lived in the country and I got to live on a farm and I got to spend a lot of time away from like what most people would consider like the normal common culture. And so it gave me a start in my life that was very innocent in my understanding of how to be in my body and how to be in nature. I wasn't contoured until quite later by culture.
Mm,
And so when I went to like go and fit in high school and go and fit in with people, I couldn't do it very well. And I just would watch people and I would observe, like, why do we act the way that we do? And why do we play these games that we play? And I went into a career, I wanted to be a doctor and I just didn't think I was smart enough. Like, I really was like, I don't know that I want to go to school for 7 years and I'm pretty sure I can't afford it. And I'm pretty sure that it's, going to be something that's beyond my mental faculties. And so I went to school for massage therapy thinking, well, I'll do this and see how I do because in British Columbia, in Canada, where I'm from, it's quite an intense program. It's like it was at the time 3 years, 10 months the year, like in remarkable amount of training that goes into the nervous system and understanding the fascial system and understanding why people experience what they experience that ultimately leads them to an experience of pain. And we were pain and soft tissue management specialists. And so
mm,
that was something that I felt to me was such a great match for the way that I like to work with people because I could use my hands more. I could not talk about what was, showing up for them. And at times there was like really great opportunities to just like learn from people. 20 years of working with people in their bodies in a place where they feel really safe, they tend to reveal to you a lot of their human experience. And I have always found that to be something to be so incredibly beautiful. So after my son was born, my son's autistic, and I needed to redirect my career. And I went the direction of weaving this massage therapy with coaching and then helping people understand that this side of what we kind of commonly call mysticism, or we kind of commonly talk about as the miraculous, is really a part of a human nature. And so I teach people that through their gene keys. And I really just find that if I can demystify the mystical and show us how miraculous our life is and how incredible it is to be these embodied beings that we are, then all of the symptoms or all of the things that we suffer with, they tend to just go away a bit more. It's not that they stop altogether. It's not that we stop having challenges or pain or, some of these experiences of like getting stuck in times in our life. We do still have those, but they tend to happen more easily that we move through transition and we find more peace in our life. And so that's become my mission is helping women understand this place of like our bodies are quite different. They're quite mystical. And that's a lot of our conversation today is to talk about all of the ways that we've lost this recognition of us being these incredibly mystical portals. So I'm
yes.
really thrilled to dive into that with you.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. Um, when did you get into somatics?
So it wasn't a thing for a long time. I knew somatics as a division of the nervous system that has to do with motility, it has to do with movement and strength. And so it was like a part of the nervous system that when I studied, it was the part that created movement. And then Peter Levine's work and a lot of the therapeutic dynamic of, hang on, I'm pretty sure that trauma is numbness in people's bodies. And there's this whole ability to realize that the body is speaking from the bottom up instead of the
Mm.
therapeutic model, which is this top-down psychological assessment. And it just really isn't able to get into some of the intelligence of the body. Now, that was apparent to me in working with people's nervous system as well as working with animals for my childhood. So somatics is something that we, now uses this word that I would say, well, that's really always been what I've been working in. And it was quite painful and
Mm.
confusing to be in a land where people were like, this causes this. And it was really directed around like the psychological side of why we make sense of the scientific, we make sense of something after. And we believe scientifically it's all of these things happening. And that's somatics seem to go in that direction, where it's like really being used to work with trauma a lot, which is great. But actually, what's happening is people have been just numb to their body, and somatics has been this way of connecting the mind with the body intelligence. And so, the first time I kind of heard of somebody working as a somatic practitioner, I was working with a woman who's a coach, and that's how she works, is like with that was her training. And that's when I started diving into like all of the other teachers. It was about 7 years ago. But yeah, like I said, it's been a part of my life for a long time.
Beautiful. So for someone who doesn't know what mystical anatomy is, how would you describe that?
Quite simply, what I would say is that it's an experience of the ineffable, or the undescribable experiences of being human, but from a deeply embodied state. And for a really long time, the way that we would use the trying to understand what was happening in those experiences of awe, right? A really simple and sort of obvious one that I remember is I was talking to a friend of mine who is Christian for a really long time, and she was like really struggling with a lot of her Christian upbringing. And so I was like, why do you believe it? Like, what is the thing for you that really made you a believer? And she said, I knew from a really young age that there was something special about my relationship with God, but it wasn't really until I had my kids that you have this moment where you're like, there's no way there can't be something bigger going on than this. There's no description to really help bring a true understanding to how magnificent this experience is. And we've all had those experiences, but I think a lot of the time we try to make them fit into our limited human reality. And what I have found is that if we can just turn ourselves consistently to listening to the awe and the miracles that are happening all the time in our life, we actually start to realize that it's quite a simple way of living. It's quite a simple and simplistic way of being ordinary and a divine consciousness simultaneously. And I truly believe that humanity is moving from this time of like it being this far off thing to remembering it was like always a part of our anatomy. And the early mystics told stories of that. And now we're coming back to this time where we're returning to these mystical embodiment experiences and the superpowers that we all have within us that we've been conditioned to believe are only available if you are at this like, mystical embodied expression of the saints or these, sages that have devoted their life to being in a cave and studying these things. I truly believe that humanity has got more gifting available than they realize because of cultural conditioning.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I've learned so much from you. And one of the things that I absolutely love that you do is how you have this way of keeping the science alive while still bringing in some of this mystical knowledge. And yeah, you just have such a way to combine the two and honor both sides. So you made it very, very digestible for me, at least. And I love that about you.
Yeah, thank you. I think I'm always a little bit doubtful of the mystical. And so there's a part of me that's like, okay, wait, what is happening there, And fortunately, because of the advances in the sizes of cameras that can go into the body and the ability of the electron microscope to see things that we couldn't see before, we can now see these things that people were like, oh, that's like the
Mhm.
divine or that's God or that's whatever. And now we can be like, actually, it's zinc. And zinc at a spark at a certain time in your birth does this thing. We don't know why it does that thing. That's still the mystical, but we can actually start naming parts of what's happening. And so that's the side where I just love empowering people to understand about how mystical their body is by the nature of our anatomy. And if you want to take
Mhm.
it to any title that you want to take it to, that's fine. But I think that it's just really sweet that we can remember that we have this divine relationship with the world. And I do feel like that's a lot of why we suffer is we've forgotten that we have this divine relationship with ourself and then ultimately a bigger scale of what that means for humanity.
Yeah, yeah, beautiful. You mentioned Jinkies,
Yeah.
and I know that a lot of people are familiar with human design, but not so much with Jinkies. Would you mind briefly sharing what Jinkies are?
Yeah, I found Gene Keys first and then I was like, how did this man, Richard Rudd, how does he know so much about my heart? How did he write this book that like goes into the detail of what it's like to be an embodied human and why do we feel beauty in poetry and why do we feel, these experiences of like a shudder through our body when a child giggles. And he's such a poetic author, but like his background was human design. And so when I figured that out, I was like, all right, I'm going to go to the source. I'm going to go to human design. And I adore human design. I still rely on it for many things, but I didn't really feel like it helped people move through what their chart is. So if you're brand new to the Human Designer Gene Keys system, there's so much information online. I would say like go and check it out. But the Human Design map is like a map of our energy body. The Gene Keys system is a spectrum of frequency that gives us a place where we can kind of go, here's how our system will go into overwhelm when our wound is triggered or some of our early childhood attachment patterning is like coming forward to be healed or readdressed in a new way. And here's the gift frequency that every single one of us has. And if you focus on your gift frequency, you're going to stop trying to waste your energy in realms of human experience that maybe you were culturally told, like, if you're a doctor, then you're a worthy person of love. Or if you're a good mother, then you're a worthy person of love in society. And it allows us to really look at like, oh, I have superpowers and they have to do with this imprint in my life and I can participate with them. I can see where they go unconscious and I can see where I can be more conscious in them. And then the more I'm conscious in them, the more my super consciousness opens up. So it becomes this really incredible tool for a person to be exactly themselves. As opposed to most
Mhm.
systems are like, oh, well, you're Leo. So a Leo is like this, right? And it's really generic. Or you're like, there's like lots of aptitude tests like this in management and leadership where it's like, you're this type of employee, or you're like this type of nervous system based on your attachment because of your childhood. And all of those are great, but what I found that the Gene Keys does is it gives me a map of exactly how a person's life could expand should they focus their energy on areas where they already have a lot of gifting. And that it just makes people more successful, as well as it means that they don't always need a coach or a consultant to rely on, right? It means that they've got the tools to live their life becoming more and more themselves as opposed to trying to fit into this collective system. So that just felt to me like the right direction to support humanity. And it also took this side of me that was worried that I needed to be the smartest one in the room and have all of the answers all the time and just turned it into this like, well, you tell me, like you know your body better than anybody. You know your life and your consciousness better than anybody. What are you seeing? And a lot of the time people already know where their gifting is. They already know where they're passionate about. But what we need to meet in our passion is like all of the times we were wounded, all of the times that our parents didn't meet us because they weren't resourced, all of the heartbreaks that happen, that ferocious, hungry desire that a woman has, that then means that she has to meet the sides of her that are like, oh gosh, what do I need to see here? And that can be so scary to be able to
Mhm.
connect to like the truth of our desire body and the truth of our soul, and then realize like, oh boy, I can't deny it now. I've seen it. It's there. I've let the monster out. And what do I
Uh,
do with it? And so it's like it's really great to be able to go, you get to just be more of you. You just get to come more and more back to yourself. So it's not
mhm.
about chasing healing or production. It's about returning to like, I have an essential gift. And the more we overflow with that essential gift, the more we want to be of service to the world, as opposed to like this transactional way that we've a lot of the time been told, like, if you do this, you get a gold star, and then you can be a quote unquote good person. And then we end up feeling numb. We end up feeling
Mhm.
just like we're performing instead of being
Mhm.
true to ourselves. So I really have come to love it for that. And I've really come to love the community of people that are wanting to participate in this culture of just like really being more sovereign and being true to ourselves.
Yes. You've coached me through this process, and it's been a gift to have you as my guide as I have embarked in this new journey or phase of my journey. And so, with everything you've shared about the gene keys and feminine embodiment, it's really allowed me to begin to relax more, trust myself more. And and that's why I wanted you to come have this conversation today, because it's such a gift. And I feel like personally I owe it to other women to share this with them. And so I don't know if you know this story, but a few years ago, I realized that I had a wounded relationship with the feminine. It's probably sometime in 2023. And back then, when I realized this, I realized that my entire life I had observed my mom be in a constant state of fawn. And so she was always taking care of others, people pleasing, neglecting herself, didn't know how to say no, you name it, like all the fun behaviors, she did them. And so as a little girl, I made this correlation with being a woman slash being feminine equals to being a pushover and being weak. So growing up, I took on the opposite. And so I put on the shield. I became hyper structured, hyper protective. And so when I made this realization a few years ago that I had this wounded relationship, I had this sort of epiphany, and it was very it was very healing, even though at the moment it was nothing but pure awareness, and I didn't get to do the depth of the work that I've had the opportunity to do with you. But even that awareness was uh it was so healing, because I began to allow myself to soften more. I literally softened my shoulders. I softened my face. I noticed how I walked around with like this shield on my chest and my chest up high. And suddenly I just sort of went,
Yeah.
and I just was able to like sink into myself again, just with the awareness. I started wearing more dresses. I was like, okay, how do I like step into that feminine feeling? How do I embody the feminine? And I started wearing more dresses, more floors. I invited colors into my life. And yeah, it was kind of like the beginning of this healing journey with the feminine. And when you came into my world not too long ago, what has been like, what, December of last year, we started working together. It just has, the growth has just like been so huge in just 6 month period. Like I am in awe of what I now understand. So you kind of just like made sense of everything that I observed, and everything that I didn't understand growing up as a little child, and everything that I had carried as a young adult, and later on as an adult. So thank you for that. So how would you describe feminine embodiment to the woman that is listening who may see herself in either where my mom was or where I was? How would you describe that to this woman?
Yeah. Thank you for this question. And thanks for sharing that vulnerability, that place. I feel like so many women, myself included, can identify with that experience of the wounded feminine experience. And then really just like innocently adopting it from our environment or from our big people and however we were raised of like, this is the way that I can get safety and
Mhm,
attachment. And whenever we're dealing with the nervous system, a really great way of understanding the nervous system is that the nervous system's job is to keep us safe.
mhm,
And so in every moment, it's asking that question, am I safe? Do people around me communicate to me that I can be playful, expressive, open, take up space, artful, silly, all of these things that are actually innocent human impulses. And more often than not, when we're under-resourced, the answer to that question is no. You need to be smaller. You need to be different than you are. You need to act a certain way. You need to look a certain way. You need to represent me as your mother a certain way because other people are watching. And so we start recognizing that in order to experience safety, in order to maintain safety, in order to be a part of a family field, which to a young body or mind, if you're not, you're gonna die, right? Like you
Hmm.
don't necessarily consciously think that, but that's the nature of our nervous system. It
Hmm.
communicates we need to achieve connection. If we don't maintain and achieve connection, then we're gonna die. And so
Hmm.
we do this thing called fawn, and the fawn response is like an overly yin or overly feminine expression of energy, essentially. So rather than stand up to mom and say, I want to be big. I want to be expressive. I want to be playful. I want to be open. I want to be this embodiment of life coursing through me. We we contour ourselves. We constrict
Hmm.
ourselves. We minimize ourselves. Don't be too sexy. Don't be too playful. Don't be too boisterous. All of these things that so many women are trying to find their way back to because we've numbed and lost connection with them.
Hmm.
There's this great teacher of like feminine empowerment, Perry Chase. She calls the fawn response lying for attachment. And it actually happens so much in our society that we've gotten used to it. Like we just think it's kind of a social grace, like, oh my gosh, you look so beautiful. Oh, thank you. It's nothing. And we like go to like this like
Hmm.
observe what she physically looks like, talk about what she physically looks like and how she's acting. And then she goes, no, and she minimizes it, even though it's like, please see me. I'm a big life force that wants to be this expression of love. And so I also had that like childhood experience of minimize, don't overdo, you're going to attract negative attention. Even just being a little bit of myself, I attracted attention in a small town that led to people being like, you're a slut. Who do you think you are? I was like, I never actually got beat up, but it was like a constant physical threat. And girlfriends
Hmm.
of mine got beat up for being pretty, for being boisterous, for standing out or sharing too much. And so the funny thing was, is there's the male attention because it can be like this place where women are trying to protect their daughters against kind of the male gaze and the elements of what that can mean. But a lot of the time, from that place of fear, women are bullying other women because they don't want to have something happen to a girl when she's too young to understand what it is, or they are threatened and they don't recognize, oh, I'm threatened by this expression of feminine. And so we need to, alter the way that it's showing up. So all of these little tiny subconscious cues, we're steeping in them our whole life. And then we go into this incredibly yang or masculine amplified world that we're in right now, which is all about performance and production and having at the very least to look like you're successful, regardless of if you deeply feel like you're successful or not. So that environment is a perfect place for us to prune away our connections to our intuition, to prune away our connections to our trust, to prune away that connection, which is like, hang on, this doesn't feel right to me.
Hmm.
And maybe that it doesn't feel right to me is like a moment of like, I want a boundary here, or I want to stop something, or I want to say something that is sort of counter to what the dialogue is that's happening in this meeting. And other times it's that we have not ever had somebody even sit with us and invite us to ask her to, how are you feeling? What is in there? So much of somatic work and this work that you're moving into and helping people with is like this reconnecting to like, what is the wild impulse that's moving through your body that may or may not make sense to somebody else's ego? And so if we
Hmm.
just took that, like how is it going to affect somebody else out of the situation? I think a lot of the time what you'll get is a pure impulse of the feminine, which can show up in men and in women. This is
Hmm.
a confusing time for a lot of people where they're like, oh no, like women need to be more feminine and men need to be more masculine. And that's a whole other conversation that we can get into. What I like to teach people is that the feminine impulse is this wild, innocent soul impulse, and it has a sensitivity to its environment because it longs to create beauty and connection and bring people together. And there's this like natural emergence of sensuality. Things smell good. We were talking about dresses as we were coming on before the session and talking about just like the feeling of what it feels like to wear a dress. Is that more feminine? Maybe. Maybe it is more feminine. You definitely look more feminine. But my next question would be like, how do you feel in it? What does it feel
Mm.
like to you? Are you doing the dress for you? Or are you doing the dress for somebody else? There's no right
Mhm.
or wrong answer to this. But like a lot of the time women are dressing for other women. They're not dressing for men. A lot of the time women are over masculining in their life because they've never really understood how to feminine because it would mean that we would lose attachment. It would mean that we would lose respect. It would mean that we would lose a sense of identity that we know really, really well. So it's a really confusing thing in the beginning phases of recognizing, oh, I have a wound from needing to protect myself from this.
Mhm.
I don't
Mhm.
even know that I had a wound. And then we have to look at like, shoot, I've built a whole life potentially around this experience, which I thought was me, but it really
Mhm.
wasn't. It's like a
Mhm.
series of reactions and patterns that are cobbled together that our brain thinks, or ego more accurately, thinks is us. So that place of meeting it and kind of going like, who am I?
Yeah.
It's scary. And a lot of people, they dip a toe in the work or they dip a toe in somatic work and they're like, oh gosh, I do not want to open, that trap
Mm.
door to all of these cellar experiences that have been buried in my body. And
Mhm.
so it's like a lot of our work is like helping women understand it's magnificent. And yes, it can be terrifying when you first look for the first time after not looking for a long time and it's confusing and it can be embarrassing. It's like, I've been,
Yes.
I've been acting a way that wasn't true to me, really saying
Yes.
to people, this is true to me. I am this way. I'm absolutely this way. And really for years trying to convince people of this way and then come to a realization of like, oh, I think I just took one of the three hands that was dealt to me of you're allowed to be this way. And I really never
Mhm.
asked myself what's true for me. So that tends to happen for many of us on this timeline of like 40 to 50. Our life changes, our estrogen starts to go down, and then all of a sudden there's this like, wait, who am I? Maybe I'm really successful. Maybe I really know myself really well, but I feel hollow and numb. And so this is where our work kind of intervenes is like, there's a way, there's a way to start to know yourself. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And that is so liberating, that opportunity to connect with the healthy feminine. That for me was very liberating. And it's like, it was like a coming home to self because she was always there. And I tried to push her down because I kept making this connection with being feminine means being a pushover, being feminine means being weak. And so I hyper masculinize myself for for so long, and not just in the habits that I adopted, but the way I perceive life, the way I brace myself, my body, like I said. And so it was very liberating to be able to soften into my true nature and the wisdom that is the feminine, which I learned from you. You were the first one to say it to me in such a simple but such enlightening way. There is so much wisdom behind the feminine, and we are suppressing this. What? Why? Why?
Because a suppressed woman's easier to control.
Yeah. Yes.
It's a
Yes.
massive movement of helping um, humanity stay in line because it's
Mhm.
safer if we do. And that was true for a long time. It actually isn't true anymore. Now it's kind of like the medical intervention that is now causing the disease, right? Initially, it was needed and it helped the healing process, and now that the suppressive nature is hindering humanity's experience of like fullness and truth.
Mm.
Yeah.
So, when you think of the masculinized version of femininity, how would you define that to someone?
It has a lot to do with performing. Like if you can just ask yourself, I like Taoism a lot for this because Taoism is, the yang yin, the yang is masculine, the yang is this expression of agency, of seeing the world, the outer world clearly. It's an expression of discernment. It's very mental in its orientation. It cares about fixing things. It cares about protecting things. There's There's like a feedback loop if you're in a man's body that is fed by doing, where they get more dopamine. And women love dopamine as well. We also have this neurotransmitter system, but a woman's body is actually fed more by pleasure. So if you experience yourself in a performative role, there's nothing wrong with that. I love being in performative roles. I love the elements of my nature that are more yang than yin. But like you were saying in the last piece, just about like wisdom being this thing that is like the feminine expression, that's what yin is. Yin collects the results of yang. Yin is the accumulation of all of the yield from the agency, from the action. So if you wanted to make it like super kind of caveman-y, you could say the expression of whoever goes out to hunt. That's the yang expression. They're going out to get the resource and they bring it back to the cave. Then bringing it back to the cave is the yin energetic so that more people can be nourished, more people can be a part of this collective safety of us working together. So when we talk about the masculinization of the feminine, it's are you putting on a shell that's performative? And like what some of the things, like if I just call myself out for some of the things that I used to do that were really performative, I always wanted to be the cool girl, like never be jealous, not have too many needs, wanting everybody to like me, never complaining, never really wanting to have needs. That's a really great way of looking at it. If you've been cut off from your feminine expression and you've been performative in the masculine, then it can show up as an I'm going to under express my needs or I'm going to over express them in this really kind of bullish way is the other way that it can show up, where it's just like I'm a whatever, and you just need to deal with it. That's a really boundaried way of being a woman. And a woman has boundaries are helpful. Boundaries are needed. Boundaries are something that are a big part of the transition of like the younger, immature feminine learning how to come into her true capacity as feminine is to not be so overgiving, to not be so open, to not be so willowy and bendy to everything else that's occurring in their life. But as we do that, they're flexible boundaries. They're not walls, right? It can be as we get numb and armored in our experience of overperforming or over being in the dopamine related connections of our nervous system, that level of exhaustion tends to show up in autoimmune expressions of the nervous system. It starts to show up in, complete exhaustion, numbness, or this feeling of like, I like to call it like the silent scream. We have like all of this energy that wants to come out, but you don't have the ability to connect it to your voice. So it just stews and turns into this gas breaks experience. So these are just expressions of the energy that when it can't move in a way that's healthy, it starts to express in these ways that are unhealthy. And if we only know how to express according to the masculine, then it always feels like we're failing. It always feels like, I'm like working so hard, but I'm not feeling the fulfillment, or I'm working so hard, but whenever somebody, when something comes in, like I'm really successful, I wrote that book, or I'm really successful, I made $1 million, or I'm really successful, I have like the perfect kind of archetype for a family, but I don't feel fulfilled. I'm constantly actually hungry for something that's not here. You know that your feminine is in some way like hiding back behind some shadow somewhere and facing that shadow and going there when you've been conditioned not to. It can feel really scary. It can feel really overwhelming. Yeah.
Yes, I relate a lot to that. I'm sure so many women do, but that sensation, that feeling in my throat chakra, the chest, that accumulation that sat there for so long. And when I finally got to release that with somatics, it was exactly what you were saying before. Very scary, very intimidating. It was like, what is this? Who is this? And at first, I needed to, I had the need to do that more and more. And as I've sort of allowed myself to meet myself where I am emotionally, somatically, I don't have the need to do that as often, meaning having these sessions where I need to growl, sessions where I need to scream on a pillow. It happens. I have moments where I need that, but it's not as accumulated, if you will. Like I realized how much I had accumulated inside of me that in the beginning of my somatic journey, it was something that just needed to come out so much, and I didn't know what to do with it. And exactly, again, what you said, it was so scary. But then there's titration. Thank goodness for the wisdom and all the teachings of somatics that allow us to be able to learn how to release that in a safe way in our body. So
And
so
the other,
mhm,
I was just going to interrupt because you do this really, really well, is once you've done it a little bit, you also start to recognize what you need when it comes up. Like that's something that I really admire about your practice. There's so many times when we have our conversations where I'm like, oh my gosh, I feel like Vilma is even more like well resourced from your somatic practice because you're so good at being like, boop, something happened. Oh, I need to go and process and move this energy. And a lot of the time for me, I'm like, no, I need to wait for like the perfect opportunity where I'm not going to freak anybody out with my growl, or I'm not going to like, you know, be like perceived as like this psycho bitch in this moment because I'm like slapping down a boundary in a certain way. And so I love how well you kind of keep yourself at this like pulse of recognizing like how to keep moving the energy. And it's like a devotional practice. That's the masculine in a devotional relationship to the feminine, where we kind of have enough discipline to go, my vessel needs consistently to move this energy, and it's my
mhm,
responsibility. That's a masculine disposition to do that. I need to be the one that creates the container for this. And then to go and to unwind and to go into the feminine wildness, that's the feminine river. That's the place where all of that energy starts to release. So I just wanted to
mhm.
compliment you on that because it's
Thank
like
you.
really remarkable to see it done well consistently.
Thank you. I don't think I would be able to live my life anymore without my practice. It's just like, no matter if it's 5 minutes, but I need to be able to honor that. And I constantly just stop in the middle of the day too. It's like, ooh, okay, I'm feeling something, and just meet myself there. So
Yeah.
thank you for saying that. So for the person, just quickly, I want to just go back to when you were explaining Taoism. Let's go back to basics a little bit for the person who may not be familiar with Taoism. Can you quickly explain yin and yang?
Yeah. In a practical way, if you don't worry about your anatomy, so let it go. If you're a man in a man's body or a woman in a woman's body, just let that sort of side go. And imagine looking at elements like sensation, relationship, intuition, emotion, rhythm, imagery, anything to do with the right side of our brain, the more like relational, more musical, more creative side of our brain instead of the left and the linear side of our brain. It has to do with this like emergence. So instead of like going and getting something, yin waits for it to come in a cycle. It waits for it to come organically. It has a very cyclic nature to it. It moves in circles, whereas yang moves in a linear way. And all of the universe is built of this combination of light and matter. And when you start to look at the primary impulses of light and matter, you start to see that we're being puppeted by light and matter. And we really do believe that we're so in charge. And to a degree, we are. But to a greater degree, we're a part of these movements of action, yang, and rest, yin, or collection would be another way of saying it. Or I really like the word receptivity is an incredibly yin way of being. Doing action is a very yang way. And when they work together, when they're in complementarity, either in two bodies, like a man and a woman, or a masculine woman and a feminine woman, or however you want to orient, when they're in complementarity, they're incredibly supportive to each other's nature. And there's a really beautiful, healthy expression of our anatomy that comes in that sort of, I have a friend and he calls it the over unity power cycle. The thing is we also can do it for ourselves. And I think that's one of the greatest skills that I've needed to learn is I've needed to learn where I need to be more yang or where I need to be more masculine and not be so willowy feminine.
Mhm,
Bah, I'm so wet and I like need my life to not have so much emotion and all of these things. Then I need to go into these masculine practices, but you don't want to get stuck in them either. You don't want to get stuck
mhm,
in the controlling side of them. So it's aspects like that, direction, structure, analysis, execution, discernment, focus, and protection. These are very masculine or yang attributes.
mhm, mhm. So it's like the way I personally has helped me, I kind of always envision a seesaw, and it's like when the seesaw like tips over too much to one side onto the other, and like how can we come back to that balance? And it's okay if it tips over to one side, but just like a little bit more of like the other brings you back to that harmony. And so,
There's never like the teeter-totter never really stops moving. And I think a lot of the time we can struggle because we're like, oh no, I'm tipping too far. I need to stop the tip. And instead I would say, follow it. Just let it move you and catch it on the return instead. But we need awareness of what's happening in our body. And the somatic work allows us to create a lens on our inner landscape. That's probably the best way I would describe. Like somatics turns our lens instead of in the outer performative world into the inner yin world. And it allows us to be like, where am I in the yang yin dance within me?
mm, yeah, and I really want to demystify this notion that leaning too much to one side is wrong. Like Sarah was just explaining to our listeners, it is perfectly okay if you need to lean towards one side a little bit more during a certain season of your life. That is what equilibrium is about ultimately.
Yeah.
And I know I've been there in previous seasons of my life where I needed more structure, and then later in life, when I realized that structure went a little too far,
Yeah.
and I didn't really come back to that center of the seesaw. And then I needed to swing a little bit more to the other side and practice a little bit more of the softening and the compassion. And then eventually you kind of like start learning how to balance, and then become pretty skilled at staying somewhere there in the middle. So it is a practice as well,
Yeah.
as at least from what I learned.
Yeah.
Let's talk about discipline a little. What are some of the signs that what feels like discipline or ambition has actually become self abandonment? Because, like I
Mm.
said, I've been there, but I'm very curious to hear from your perspective.
I really think for a long time in my life, I had such a resistance to discipline that I now look back at kind of that inner reaction within myself where there was times where I was over disciplined, but there were also times where I got really burnt out from being over disciplined. And then I was like, I don't want to be in that structure anymore. I want to be able to experience more flow, more easefulness, more kind of like relationship with my body and with nature. But I was moving in that direction. And so then I went overly in, like you were just saying, right? It's like sometimes we need to get to the extreme peripheries of our experience to just to track where they are and then to kind of go, okay, like I now know what's to the left and what's to the right. Where's my midpoint? Recognizing that that's kind of a constantly changing thing. The funny part about it is like discipline actually gets us to start paying attention and to slow down and to stop self-abandoning and to recognize that there's something happening in here. We need the yang. Remember, the yang is the ability to see and discern. What am I doing where I'm the one that's contributing to my burnout? What am I doing where I'm contributing not because I know any other way, but because it's the only way that I've been given. And so now
Mhm.
I'm just recognizing and discerning, like, oh, I have done something to choose this. And then a lot of the time, what it is that we haven't been listening to our impulse that says no. Like every one of us has this impulse that's like a yes and a no. On a really simple terms, your body knows what's right for you. If you spend a lot of time only in your head and not able to understand what is my heart or my womb saying if you have a womb, that there's a yes and a no that comes from my body impulse. So when the body is saying things like, I'm tired, or I need to eat, or I need to rest, or I need to have a cry, or I need to slow down, the conditioning or the over masculine of discipline will tell us to push that down.
Mhm.
Other things that you can look for when you are trying to understand your relationship with discipline is like, do you find that you're practicing discipline so much that rest actually makes you anxious? Because you feel like, oh no, if I'm not constantly at this pace that I've established, like here's my targets, right? How many times have you like, here's my KPIs and I need to get
Uh-huh.
to them. And then no matter what, like I'm like exhausted and I'm dehydrated, I'm like angry at my partner or my kids, but I'm like gonna meet my target. So when
Mhm.
we start to do that and we can't feel safe in our rest anymore, we're not sleeping, our symptoms of like our cycle start to get really angry and loud. Instead of going to a doctor and saying, make me more like a man, make me not feel these
Mm-hmm.
things, make this go away, we start to listen to what that is. But
Mm-hmm.
discipline is the tone to kind of get past a really hard challenge, but then we're supposed to drop it and be like, okay, now we hydrate, now we rest, now we recover, now we go into the restoration. And in our modern world, a lot of the time, that is perceived as failure in some way, or it's like projected upon us that that makes you not as strong of a person. And I'm really interested in helping women understand how do we have this full connection with our intuition that makes us better at our work, that makes us better at relating in communities and in teams and being successful, still being productive beings, but like doing it from this place that's not so wasteful of energy and not so drying and deteriorating of our physical health. And this is something that we've both kind of been quite passionate about because so often women are like, I just need to be so skinny or I just need to be so fit all the time. And I just need to be like the most powerful one in the room, and like all of these incredible things that women are. But if you're proving it, then it's like you don't believe it. Right? You can
Mm-hmm.
radiate that. You can actually radiate that when you're rested and when you're like in your deep knowing of your value and you're not trying to perform it. So that's like where discipline and over discipline can show up as kind of it seems like a great idea, and we definitely do need to have that tool, but we don't need to rely on that tool all the time.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if we can't
Yes.
hear our hunger cues, if we can't hear that we need a hug or that we need to cry because that like becomes like this like, oh no, that would make me a failure in some way, those are indications that we've just been too much in the disciplining side of life, which can be fun if
Yes.
you want to play with it. You know, playing with discipline in such a way where you're actually like interacting with it in a playful way, that's different. And there is ways of working with discipline like that, usually that are quite healing from our like childhood upbringing as well. All of our patterns as adults are bigger versions of our patterns as children. So that's another thing to understand. It's like however you are is an appropriate response to something that's yearning to be looked at and healed, but you just haven't been able to understand what it is.
Mm-hmm. I like to explain it to my community after a lot of thought and having experience that swing to the other side of the pendulum that became really unhealthy with discipline. I've now explained it to my community as there's the healthy discipline that propels you forward, and then there's that rigid discipline that can be very easily confused for drive or
Yeah.
energy, even for me and my body, the way it felt literally when I was addicted to building my business at one point. I remember just constantly being on adrenaline and so much dopamine constantly being released in my system that I thought that was me being energized, but I was just living in a constant state of anxiety.
Yeah.
And so that is something that as individuals, as women, as humans, we have the ability to begin to observe what is that healthier side. How does healthy discipline behave versus the unhealthy side or that rigid version of discipline? So I'm curious because we know there's nothing wrong with independence, right? Performing
Yeah.
well. But at some point, it can become a little unhealthy. What would you say that fine line is?
I think that we tip over into that inadvertently when we're only celebrating visible success or we're only celebrating externalized results. So if it's like, well, I did my runs, like I did my whatever kilometers that I'm supposed to do at this time, and and you know, I'm just frustrated with how my ankles feel with it, or I'm just like feeling like I'm depleted and my body isn't keeping up to what my agenda is for my training, you know, things like that. The the thing about hyper independence, the thing about hyper anything is hyper means you've gone above, you've gone too far. You've gone too far into this thing that ultimately is not sustainable. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just it's not sustainable for a long period of time. And yet, what we try to do is we try to sustain it. We try to like set a target, and then experience the initial thing. Like I was saying, how a man's body will benefit from doing, and the dopamine will give him more agency to go into the world and to be more action oriented in his agency. It ennobles a man to suffer. But what causes a woman more nobility and more experience of like the truth of herself is pleasure. So it's this funny thing where we can get like, attached to suffering makes me more. And look how good I am at suffering. Look how tough I am. Look how driven I am. Look how, all of these qualities. And again, there's nothing wrong with those. You can use those anytime you want. You can apply them anytime you want. But if you merge your identity with them and you only allow yourself to be that person who is connected to that, then the thing that gets sacrificed is the impulses from your body, the truth of your body.
Mm.
And that intuitive mystical gifting that women have, men don't have it in the same way. It's not to say men aren't intuitive, they are. It's not to say men that don't have access to a wide array of emotional fluency and comprehension. They do. But ours is beyond by a lot for very good evolutionary reasons. And that's the thing we're sacrificing for production. That's the thing we're sacrificing for hyper independence. And it's a shell and it's a lie and it doesn't feel good. Once you know that you can get it and you're like, yeah, look at me, I've done it. I've got like the whatever $1,000 a month, or I've had these like experiences, which you've had many of them. I'm the same. I've had many of them. You get to the other side and you're like, ah, I don't really, I want the next thing. It doesn't really
Mm-hmm.
nourish us. And the reason is because it is a skill set that we have, but what really deeply nourishes most women's anatomy is oxytocin, is this connection to being in a relationship with other people's bodies, being in a relationship with children, being in a relationship with other women, being in a relationship with nature, gardening, life, these like experiences that they have to get shelved if you're always in front of a computer. They have to get shelved if you're always
Mm-hmm.
traveling around the world speaking and, leading people. Those are wonderful things, but we have to make time for our anatomy to connect to the deeper why. And independence or hyper independence starts to build a nervous system that is wired in a way where, like I said, something is sacrificed. And that
Mm-hmm.
sacrifice a lot of the time is this mystical wisdom that we have, or this deep, this. Like when somebody's lying to you and you just know,
Yeah.
as they're talking, they're like, that's not true. And other men in the room, they won't catch it at all. They'll be like, what? No, he said he did all these things. He totally caught that fish. It was this big, and like all of these kind of things. But for a woman, we're just like, I don't know how I know. I just know.
Mm-hmm.
That deep knowing
Mm-hmm.
is the feminine intelligence system. We
Mm-hmm.
have the ability to perceive in a subtle and the unseen realm in such a way that we're actually way more effective than the action or the doing side. And so when we can really magnetize ourselves from that place to all of the abundance and receiving, we're both healthy, radiant, feeling connected, and also feeling this incredible thing, which is like a deep trust in life. If we're hyper
Yes.
independent, we're walling ourselves off from this trust in life. So we don't feel our body come into the cadence of life. We don't feel our body come into the rhythm of trust with life. And it's a really exhausting place for our nervous system. It's a really exhausting place for our bodies, and it can cause a lot of disease.
Yes, yes. So would you say that that feminine wisdom is something that we activate when we step more into yin a- activities or behaviors, or like how would you say that? Like if a person wants to actually apply and then incorporate a little bit more of that or attune to their feminine wisdom within them, what would be like a practical way for them to begin that journey?
Well, it's a slowing down journey, and it's really practicing things that have a lot to do with receiving. So, receiving, if somebody gives you a compliment, there's a simple one. Can you say thank you? Or even
Mhm.
say, tell me more about why you're complimenting me. I'd love to understand what it is that you see. That puts someone in the yang disposition or the agent, but then you get to receive love. You get to practice this experience of like, what does it mean to be in receptivity of attention? What does it mean to be in receptivity of pleasure? Taking time, you know, to be with our bodies where we're living in such a way where it's like, do I want like a really beautiful dress on my body, or do I want to have this, really beautiful sensual experience of my sheets? Or look at any kind of Taurus placement in your chart. Tauruses are like the great, like the luxury feminine experience. It's
Uh,
so much to do with, um, instead of paying attention to the outer world, paying attention to the inner sensory world. And it's
Mhm.
much like that practice of just like, okay, there's the outer world. And then we drop in, we go into a lot of the time we call it a somatic practice. But really, all it is I'm dropping into my feeling landscape. I'm connecting with my heart and my womb. And within that, I didn't know what that meant initially. I didn't even like the word womb for a really long time. I couldn't even say it. It was just like there was so much feminine wounding around, like, what does that mean? And in my
Mm.
head, a lot of it was like, it means I'm weak or dependent or passive or lazy. So, like, looking at those elements of yourself, do you feel like you're enough just for being? Just
Yes.
because it's your birthright to be.
Yes.
And if you don't, there's nothing wrong with that. It just means that you've been conditioned or hypnotized that it isn't enough. And so
Yeah.
that becomes like a man's hero's journey is all about fighting the outer world and being a hero against the outer world and perform and in some way performing like what their life force is for. The feminine journey for a woman into themselves is a wholeness journey. So it's like
Yeah.
collecting all of the parts of us that we've outsourced because we were told we had to, and then really coming to that space of like, I am more than enough in at the without having to prove myself in any way. That was terrifying to me in the initial. I
Mm.
still have waves of it being terrifying, you know. You meet these like outer or like deeper resources or reaches of yourself that
Mm.
kind of percolate up and you're like, oh my gosh, this moment right now feels like this nervous system hijack of like, how dare I say yes over and over again? How dare I just receive? How dare I experience this much abundance or this much pleasure or this much love? I must be taking it from someone, right? All
Mhm.
of these like younger parts of us that were like, don't, you need to share. And like all of those are great skills, but we overdid them a lot of the time. We over applied them. And now they're creating this structure for a lot of women where they're not able to feel the fullness of their being or the value of their being. It's
Yes.
everywhere. Yeah.
Yes. And I want to clarify for our listeners, Sarah is not saying you literally have to go garden to connect with your feminine.
Yeah.
You can still be in your yang and be an entrepreneur and
Yeah.
this deeply yang connected female who is also coming back into her inner world. What we're talking about is attuning to our inner world more. That is how we activate or awaken our feminine wisdom. So, not to just only be in the external world. Is that right, Sarah? Would you say it like
100%.
simply
Yeah.
terms? Yeah.
Yeah, in simple terms, it's really being connected without abandoning what's here within me in order to perform in some way. So can I
Hmm.
stay true with what's here within me and then act from that place instead of acting from like, what does it mean for the outer world for me to do this? And why am I doing this based on the outer world need? It's like, what do I deeply want to bring into the world? And if there's heart wounding around this, it's like, rather than the heart being like, what am I fighting against? It's what are you fighting for? That's a very yin
Yes.
expression of moving towards something. A yin heart will fight for something. A yang heart will fight against it a lot of the time.
Mm.
Yeah.
Okay. So I do want to ask about pleasure because you mentioned it a couple of times, and I want to make sure that our listeners really understand what this means in the context that we're speaking of. We're not talking about sexuality, right? There's so much more to pleasure that we don't often stop to consider. So would you mind diving a little more into that?
Yeah, I was so scared of this in the initial parts of my journey, because to me it felt like, oh, if I'm like experiencing pleasure in some way, that makes me somebody that is overly interested in my own pleasure. It just seemed to me like to be this like really, really selfish thing. It didn't start to change until I started dating women. I dated men for a long time, and I have always identified as straight if you were to put a term to it. And I started dating women. I think like a lot of women do, where they like get so fed up with men or they get so heartbroken with the masculine experience that we all kind of throw out this like thing, which is like, I'm just gonna become gay or I'm just gonna like start dating,
Sure.
the opposite sex. And I was always joking about that until it came up that women started being attracted to me. And I thought, I'm just going to explore this and see if I can understand what it is going on. And what I thought was so funny was that I really got to see women through the lens of being the masculine instead, because it was, if I'm in a relationship with a man, then a lot of the time I'm assuming that I'm the feminine, whether it's conscious or not. I'm just kind of going into that patterning. But it needs to be decided, or it's sort of subtly communicated when you're in a relationship with women. And I started to see how much women block pleasure or feel like they are not entitled to pleasure because they're taking up somebody else's attention or space or something like that. There's some child that needs to be attended to. There's some man that needs to be attended to. There's some job that needs to be attended to. And it got me really curious about that patterning that we have around that. And I started following other feminine leaders around this, like, what does it mean to be a deeply embodied woman? And over and over and over again, I kept coming up to this teaching of like a woman's power gets stronger when she experiences pleasure. And you're right, it sometimes it's sexual. That's one of the many ways women are multi-orgasmic. So we have a higher aptitude for pleasure. We also have a higher aptitude for pain in our body. But like women are designed to experience more pleasure. And I thought that was fascinating. And then there's all of these ways that it communicates to our nervous system and our hormonal cascade system that it can restore itself. So it takes us out of a void as well as out of like the like overly yin flight version of our nervous system where we're like, "Ah, I have to help somebody else." It
Mm,
actually makes us like draw, it becomes this meditation. Like, what feels good on my skin? Is it that
mm,
soft fur that feels good on my skin? That becomes the meditation that takes us out of our planning head. It also communicates to the body, okay, now we're moving more towards parasympathetic as opposed to
mm,
sympathetic, which is the more like yang expression of the nervous
mm,
system. And in parasympathetic, we go into this healing, rest, digest, connect, it's restorative, that all of the cellular communication changes so that we're not burning energy to think. Instead, what we're doing is we're taking the glucose out of our blood and we're putting it into our cells. So it is for a woman it fills your batteries to experience
mm.
pleasure. Being a massage therapist, I saw this over and over again, right? Like probably 70% of my clientele was women that were just like, I need it. I can't go on if I don't take this time for myself. But they would feel so guilty about like needing to be touched in a non-sexual way or needing it to be an hour or an hour and a half that was all for them because all of the rest of their life is for
Mhm,
everybody else. And so it was just so fascinating to me that like we would many women would make excuses for like, oh, I just need to do this so I can go on, or I just need
mhm.
to do this for me. But the thing is there's all of these underhanded like shadowy versions of trying to get pleasure where we're like trying to buy these gorgeous $3,000 shoes because they are gorgeous, like, they are beautiful, they do bring us so much pleasure, but they also impact us in these other ways in our body. And you start to see the subversive ways that the absence of pleasure shows up as manipulation or deceit, or sort of this kind of way that women can not fully acknowledge what their needs are in a moment because that would make them whatever kind of cultural assumption is associated
Mm,
with it, right? Whatever is kind
mm,
of on the other side of that. So just to kind of come back to the anatomy for women, I feel like was like the thing that they needed is like, no, you need that like fuel. Like you wouldn't look at your car and go, why is it failing me? Because it couldn't drive from point A to point B because it ran out of gas. You wouldn't judge your
yeah.
car for that. You'd be like, oh, it needs fuel. Well, for men, like I said, they become more noble in action. For women, we become more open, more receptive, more beautiful, more radiant in receiving pleasure. And that still kind of boggles my mind that that's what our
Mhm,
bodies need to thrive is pleasure.
mhm. What are some practical ways to allow ourselves to start receiving pleasure other than sex, obviously? But I mean, at least from some of the things you've shared with
Yeah.
me, just allowing ourselves to enjoy food more, like
Yeah.
actually take our time with our food and experience the different flavors in our mouth and allow ourselves like just literally go feels so good, it tastes so good, right? So like that's one way you've explained to me, or like you were saying earlier, like just feeling the soft sheets on your skin, like feels so good to be on this bed right now and just cozy up for an extra 15 minutes in the morning. Like what are some other ways that women can begin to incorporate this into their lives?
So I would say this is for women, but it's for everybody
Hmm.
ultimately. And that is you train your eye to look for it by practicing. prioritizing it, right? So like you can train your eye to look for a um, white Mercedes because you want to buy
Mm,
a white Mercedes, right? And then all of a sudden, what do you see? White Mercedes everywhere. They're all over the place. Your eye is now going, I want that. But when we do this with pleasure, we do exactly what you said. You know, we slow down. Oh my gosh, this tomato, or like this glass of rosé in this moment, or that song, or like the sound of a baby when they giggle. You know, we have opportunities all around us to experience the somatic filling up of pleasure. It has to do with slowing down. It has to do with being the first one to meet yourself in tenderness and go, this is a value of mine. This is what I want to move towards. It might mean that I need to look at parts of myself that are wanting to heal, but ultimately, I want to deeply experience pleasure and I want to move in this direction. I want to find out what that means for me. And so you just kind of have to go into like one of the things that I do with women right now is a like desire and sensation discovery day because they're like I'm numb. I don't know what it is that I like sensually anymore. I don't know what feels pleasurable to me anymore. I'd like to know kind of what's out there. And it's like playing with various different sensations. Like scratching your nails on your skin feels completely different than the sensation of like running a broad hand down the side of your leg all the way down to your foot. One's really
mhm,
grounding, one's really stimulating. When you start to play in those, you start to realize like, okay, that gives me pleasure in this way, but that gives me pleasure in this way. And you can actually become like a sommelier of pleasure. And I'm
mm.
just why wouldn't we? Like, why would we not want to do that? You know,
Yeah.
it can be sitting down and like reading like your novel or whatever you want on a day where it's also raining outside and you get this like sensory
Mm,
immersion that's happening in your experience.
mm,
Those are filling to women. Like those experiences that we've always romanticized for women and for life is because it's the essence of life. Woman is
mm.
the essence of life. So when we slow down and like track for the essence of life, we see it everywhere. And that allows us to transform our eye that was conditioned to perform, to always look a certain way, to act a certain way, to always be in the externalization. It turns the volume down on that and it turns the volume up on the feminine like gaze.
Yes, yes. And it just naturally invites presence into our life. It's really what you're talking about. It's enjoying the little moments, the little things. And it's the way to live.
It invites
It's the way to
presence.
live.
And it's like the thing that so often we're hungry for is that experience of presence. But like when you're in a restaurant and you see a woman like eating a meal and she's like making noise, and you're like, look
That's
at
me.
her. Yeah.
That's me.
Everyone orients and they're like, I want what she's having for a reason, right? When we see women that are deeply embodied and they have that feminine presence in their body because they live so much in their body, it's magnetic. We can't look
Mm,
away. So it stops being about like the acting like I'm so magnetic and it actually starts to be like, woo, you can't look away. It's
mm.
so enticing. So that feminine power that comes from pleasure is something that I think that's the reason why women were contoured to like not follow that. You know, like what does
Mm,
it mean if every woman was like following that? I think it would be an amazing world, but it would also mean that we would stop being so easy to manipulate into buying this thing. This thing will bring you pleasure, or this thing will bring you the beauty that will bring you pleasure, or this thing will bring you the whatever that ultimately, no, pleasure is available to us all the time. It's really
mm.
just the slowing down and appreciating when other women are in it too. You know, I love when I see other women really like slowing down and bringing their full presence and attention to their experience. And so, yeah, I think celebrating more women doing it is another thing we can be spending more time celebrating.
Yes, yes, agree. Thank you. Sarah, I knew this would happen. We haven't even gone through half of our questions. I think we're going to have to do a part two. Are you up for part two of this episode? Okay.
I would love to. I would love to. Yeah,
Because
absolutely.
there's so much more I want to dive into with you, but I know we're past an hour and I want to make sure I keep these digestible for our listeners. But you are amazing. I am so grateful for you. I do want to ask just one last question. If there was anything that you want our listeners to take away from this conversation, what would it be?
I really believe that it would be that it doesn't matter how much you chase anything outside of you, The most powerful thing you can do in your healing journey is to be the one that meets yourself in tenderness. And if you've had childhood trauma, which I feel like almost everyone has at this point, if you've been conditioned to be outside of your alignment in some way, the ability to not judge yourself and the ability to meet yourself in compassion is going to be the hardest part of your journey, but it's everything. None of the other outer tools, no guru, no system, no kind of like biohack will bring you the thing that you're looking for, like compassion for yourself will. And as somebody that knows that, and as somebody that's like works so hard to role model this for other women, I just want to say it can be so terrifying and so hard. But that's what it is. That's the thing that you're looking for, is to be able to be the one that's like genuinely loving to yourself first, and then everything changes.
Yes, beautiful. Thank you, Sarah. You're the best. I so appreciate you.
Thanks, Bamalis.